I think when you think about Brazil from the broadest scheme as part of the emerging markets, which is what I do, and you look at the rate of gross domestic product or GDP growth in real terms over the last 2 decades, the rate of growth on average among emerging markets has been twice as fast as real GDP growth among the advanced countries. So there's a real structural change in the world economy of which Brazil is very much at the forefront. The barriers that are faced today in terms of overconsumption, insufficient investment in investment, frankly, the culture of dealing with discretionary behavior, which is a polite way of talking about corruption. These are all problems that emerging markets face. And I would say that a large geography like Brazil has huge upside potential. It's going through a soft period at this point, but I think as we'll discuss, there are ways and policies and reforms that are needed to help Brazil regain its rightful strength.
Okay. Jose, let me turn to you with a similar question, sort of what the advances are, what perhaps the barriers are, and also you have been watching for many years, but particularly the last 4 years, the U.S. commercial relationship with Brazil. So how does, when you're thinking about it from the U.S. government point of view, or just as a thoughtful person, what do you see down in Brazil?
And those two are not exclusive, right?
Exactly.
I think the title of this session is important, Brazil Revisited. I think it's important to revisit Brazil every few years. When I went into government 4.5 years ago, everyone thought that the future had arrived in Brazil, that after almost 2 decades of orthodox economic policies, Brazil was ready to take off, and it has. You had the World Cup, you had the Olympics, pre-sold finds showed people that God was Brazilian. That was 4.5 years ago. For about a year now, I've been hearing a lot of grumblings about Brazil. What Minister Pimentel called the gargalos have come to the fore. And you're more likely to hear grumblings about the anemic GDP growth, the preferences, the protectionism, the local content requirement, the complexity of the tax system, all of the things that go into the Brazil cost, the Custo Brasil. And always, of course, in the background have been what at times have been somewhat prickly relations between the two governments, between the Brazilian government and the U.S. government, most recently with the postponement of President Rousseff's state visit here. I don't think those who talked about Brazil as having a pristine future, I think they were overstating the point, and I also think that those who are now talking about the grumblings, about the gargalos, I think those critics are also overstating the point. And I'll end here, and I hope we talk a little bit about this, because numbers don't lie. And on a macro level, our commercial relations with Brazil have never been better. In 2012, Brazil was our 8th largest export market, $76 billion, with a $12 billion surplus in favor of the United States. What country do we have a 12 billion surplus with? You can talk about them in your hand. But the fact of the matter is that our trade with Brazil has doubled, more than doubled in the last decade, that we have the surplus, that this year that surplus will even be higher, and those who really think about this will tell you that we will have the 5th largest surplus with any country with Brazil. 3 of those countries are countries that don't really consume those products, Hong Kong, UAE, and the Netherlands. The only other consuming country that we have a surplus with is Australia. So those numbers don't lie. And then, of course, we could talk a little bit about, and I hope we do, about the economic and social aspect of the fact that you almost have 2 million Brazilian tourists coming to the States this year, who spend, according to everybody who will look at it, who spend more money than any other Latin American tourist. And also that in the last couple of years, we've had over $4 billion worth of Brazilian investments in the U.S. And again, I still have these numbers in my head, Those investments account for over 110,000 American jobs. So you have the figures, you have the grumblings, you have the hype, and then you have the naysayers. And I think that's why I think it's important to revisit Brazil. I think the reality is a little bit more nuanced. There are great opportunities, and I hope we talk a little bit about that today.
Great. Paulo, let me turn to you and one, ask you, as a Brazilian, what should Brazil be most proud of over this last 10 years? And then also, if you're making a to-do list for Brazil, what's number one up there for your country?
No, that's the first question is easy. We are absolutely proud, immensely proud of our democracy. No, I am of the generation that was born in a dictatorship. We are going to deliver to the next generations a consolidated, thriving democracy. This is the most important part of it. Brazil, with a dysfunctional political system, sometimes it is dysfunction, but ours is not the only dysfunctional democracy in the world, as some of people here may understand. We have produced a system where there has been positive outcomes economically through, it has been discussed here. There has been a deepening of democracy. Is a democracy for the sake of democracy, because this is our option. We are not going to go away from that. There is no thinking in Brazil about a variant to democracy. Sometimes even when in the ruling party there are some people interested in maybe considering that the media should be censored, you can see immediately the majority of the party and President Dilma Rousseff say, no, 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 this is a democracy. That democracy was able to produce positive outcomes which is spectacular, in a relatively average, low economic growth in this last period. This is unheard of, okay? This is very important. Now, that democracy has produced also something else. Its benefit has produced all the new challenges we're talking about. We need the infrastructure that congressmen are talking about. It has exposed our deficiencies, because we need more educated people. The only reason we have full employment in Brazil today is that we do not have enough skilled workers to do what we need to do. So we are reaching some limits in Brazil. We are reaching, and I think the minister was absolutely right. The next challenge is competitiveness, which has to do with openness, which has to do linked to innovation. And we don't have a system that is propitious for that. We have just had the proof in Brazil that we need openness. We try to do concessions for infrastructure work. We try to do it in a variety of ways. After trying everything, we finally managed to get an interesting set of conditions, and we just privatized the Rio airport, the Galeão airport, or the Tom Jobim airport, that's why we should call it, and the bidder, with an enormous margin, was the best airport managers in the world. That is the company from Singapore. I actually am from São Paulo, and I'm sorry that we didn't get them, because they are very good. But it tells you what is the way ahead. The problem is, and I would like to go back to what Congressman Marco Maia just said, that they need to conversation. I think we need a conversation in Brazil among ourselves about one very important thing that he said, and about the minister Pimentel also said, but we don't talk that way in Brazil. We all recognize that this that we have today, that we are proud today, was a joint effort by honorable people that work together. They belong to different political parties. But we don't talk like that in Brazil. I think our national conversation and moving ahead would be much easier if we would, in our campaigns, instead of really attacking each other and not recognizing each other's achievements as our collective achievement. This happens in Washington a lot, by the way.
Oh, no.
Right? No, but we have to, because Brazil does not have an alternative. Either we move forward and we face the challenges of competitiveness and open, or we are going to be left behind. This is not something that God is Brazilian and our future is. No, our future has to be built as much as our present was built. And sometimes it worries me that the political conversation in Brazil is not getting to the point of openness and honesty that we'll have, instead of having the silly debate we had last week between the current president and one former president about privatization, because apparently to talk about privatization in Brazil is a sin. You talk about concessions. We didn't privatize anything. Obviously you did privatize. Let's open up, because the new generations in Brazil, especially these people that went to the streets in June, I think what they were telling us, what they're telling the government, the opposition, the press that didn't get it initially, is we have seen the promised land, we know where we are going, we like it, but we are afraid now the economy is underperforming, that we are not going to get there. So what we need is, we need more, we need better, and we need faster. And I think politicians in Brazil and public servants and people in business have this, and educators have this tremendous responsibility now to understand this and to act.
Great. Let me take you all looking forward now, and you've started us already in that direction, Paulo. But let me turn to you, Jose, because some part of Brazil's future actually isn't under Brazil's control. It's not whether they go better or faster or they form a consensus politically or not, but it's what happens around the rest of the world and the way the rest of the world is changing, whether Brazil adapts or doesn't in that case. And one of the big, at least discussions, negotiations out there, if not realities yet, are global free trade agreements, and particularly two that involve the Western Hemisphere are the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, which, if it comes together, it brings together North America and many Pacific countries along with those around the Asian rim, would represent nearly 40% of world GDP, a third of world trade. And then the other, smaller one, is the Pacific Alliance. So that was founded by Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. And this, too, is a free trade agreement, but it goes beyond that. It involves merging of stock markets. It involves opening up the movement of labor, of people. It involves even founding embassies jointly around the world. Now, Brazil isn't part of either of these. And so do these matter for Brazil's future? And if they do, Jose, how do you think that it matters?
Well, they clearly matter. The question is, how do they matter? Both the TPP and TTIP, the European agreement, if they're finalized, will cover 3/4 of the world's trade. The TPP by itself will be 40%, and there are 5 Latin American countries that are part of the TPP. Brazil is not part of it, and I think some of this goes back to something that we haven't talked about, but Minister Pimentel alluded to it, which is the issue of competitiveness. Traditionally, Brazil has not been willing to talk about a bilateral investment treaty with the U.S., a double taxation treaty with the U.S., an FTA with the U.S., or if they do, they say, well, you have to include all of Mercosur in an FTA. Well, what are the chances that the U.S. Congress will approve an FTA with Bolivia? So that's a non-starter. You have an unwillingness on the part of Brazil to agree to the government procurement agreement. You have an unwillingness of Brazil to join some international economic organizations such as the OECD. All of those, and you'll ask them why, and they'll say, well, either Mercosur or our tax systems are different, or at the end of the day, when you get down to it, the issue of competitiveness in the context of trade, the fact that trade increases competitiveness, increases innovation, hasn't gotten into the dialogue. Mm-hmm. And I think, to go back to the point of the TPP and the Alliance of the Pacific, all of these are broader issues. Brazil, the issue of competitiveness, that fourth stage that the minister was talking about at lunchtime, I think is also tied to the issue of an FTA with a number of other countries. And when you talk to the Brazilians about it, and you get to the Mercosur issue, and what they look at trade still, in my eyes, as almost as a mathematical construct. There's no reason why we should sign a double taxation treaty with the U.S. because there's more investment on the part of the U.S. and Brazil, and consequently, we'll lose money on the tax issue. That kind of change I think mental change will happen. I think Brazilians recognize the value of innovation. The TPP, even when it gets signed, will bring it to the fore. The Alliance of the Pacific, I think, is a very important compact that is just getting started, and it has gotten started without any kind of U.S. involvement. If you think about it, it's a homegrown Latin American free trade agreement, and that has allowed it to grow, the fact that we've stayed out of the way. But I do think at some point how that impacts Brazil and how that impacts their desire, which is the correct desire, to improve competitiveness, I think that will come to the fore.
Good. Paulo, you're nodding your head a lot through this, and you brought up competitiveness. So how do you see the free trade element, and particularly as we go forward? 2014 is going to be an election year. It's going to be a World Cup year. There's going to be eyes locally and internationally on Brazil. Is this something that Brazil will get this need for competitiveness and move forward in 2014? Or are we waiting for later?
Just take this program that President Rousseff started, the Science Without Borders. There have been 40,000 kids, university students of science, engineering, math, sent out to study at least 1 year. 25% of them chose to come to the United States. Why? I think they sense that, because here you get the universities, there are other people in Japan, in good universities in Europe, but there is, I think, the young people in Brazil feel this very, very clearly. Actually, very interesting, in Brazil we have the most popular university course in Brazil today is international relations. There are 170 programs in Brazilian universities in international relations. So people sense that we have to integrate ourselves. The competitiveness issue is front and center to this. I believe that we need to, this is also the forces, the powers that be in Brazil. I was surprised the other day, I was in Denver for a meeting with Robson Andrade, the president of National Confederation of Industry. He started talking about this, that we need a free trade agreement with the United States, and it's time to revisit Mercosur. Mercosur is politically very important, but there is a growing consensus in Brazil that the trade part of Mercosur has to be modified. Mercosur has to revert to a free trade area instead of failed customs union, and free Brazil from this problem of not being able to negotiate. I believe there is another element that is becoming clearer and clearer in Brazil society. Our 20 years strategy on trade policy has not gone well. Actually, we are going to have this week in Bali probably another illustration of that, where unfortunately, World Trade Organization will probably end up with this ministerial meeting as a much lesser organization. Brazil bet everything on multilateral trade. We didn't give much importance to those regional trades. We rejected FTAA for reasons, I cover all of that as a journalist and for reasons that I completely understand, but we are faced with a reality now that we have trade agreements with 3 minor countries, and we have this population in Brazil. Companies in Brazil understands this because they are leaving Brazil. There are about 30 to 35 Brazilian global companies now in the world. Some of them, including the businessman that is the closest person in the business community to President Dilma Rousseff, Jorge Gerdau from the steel industry, who said it's cheaper to make steel in Alabama than it is in Brazil. The question of competitiveness, cost of taxes, etc., it's very, very clear. Now, what you have to have is the political courage to confront Brazilian society with this discussion. That's why I find very refreshing what I heard from the minister, from the congressman, because we, I think, have the space, have the talent. We are a country of negotiators in Brazil. Always remember that. We have a talent for negotiations, and we don't have an alternative. Either we do this and we face the challenges that have all been very well identified here, or Brazil is going to fall behind. One final thing on a positive note, for instance, the Pacific, the free trade, I don't know if actually, I find it very important what the Pacific Rim countries in South America and Mexico are doing. That's very innovative, and actually the Chinese look at that and decided to come in, and they are taking lots of businesses that used to be Brazilian business in those countries, they are taking it away. I don't know if the United States is going to be in that. From what I live in Washington, and I don't believe that President Obama has much of a chance to get anything approved in Congress referred to this, free trade authority, any of that. But I think that Brazilians have to and are starting to pay a lot of attention to that, to associate Brazil with the centers of economic dynamism in the world. And we have two reasons to do that. One is Embraer. Embraer is one and the only high-value production chain company, production chain where Brazil is a participant.